it certainly can't be taken literally. I mean, if you take chapter 2, if you take the creation story in Genesis chapter 2, the first thing created is the human being. The human being is created before there are any plants on earth or animals. In Genesis 1, the plants are created before there's a sun. How does that work exactly? And so you just can't take this literally.
Hello lovely people, my name is Emma. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you are new. I'm extremely excited about today's video. You know we've talked about Genesis and a couple of the stories from there a lot on this channel. Today it is my absolute privilege to share some words from Dr. Bart Ehrman on the topic. He is a world-renowned Bible scholar. He's written many books on the topic, including 6 New York Times bestsellers. He is also a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Ehrman has a new online course coming out called In the Beginning: History, Legends and Myths in Genesis, which I am super excited about. He is so knowledgeable on this topic, and it was so exciting to speak to him about one of my favourite topics, which is Genesis. Thank you so much, Dr. Ehrman, for joining me today. It's lovely to have you.
Thanks.
I am very excited because you have this new course on history, legend and myth in Genesis. That's something that comes up a lot on my channel. So the first thing I've got to ask you is, what is it about Genesis? What do you think it is that gives Genesis such staying power? Why does it still fascinate so many people today, especially preachers? Why Genesis?
Well, I mean, it's the beginning of the Bible to begin with, but it's also the beginning of the known universe. And so people are interested in that, and it provides obviously an alternative way of understanding not only where the world came from, but where we came from. And I think especially for people religious, I mean, it's very very important. But even people who aren't religious, it provides this kind of mythical view that is worth thinking about. Not that it's scientifically right, but that it has a kind of a mythical quality that's trying to teach about the big issues in life more than probably just about any other book of the Bible in some ways. And so I think it's always going to have its importance, whether somebody literally wants to think about it as acceptable or not.
You've taught a lot about textual inconsistencies and contradictions, particularly in the New Testament. How and why those things happened. I really love misquoting Jesus. That's your book, not The Activity.
Yeah.
Do we see the same problems in Genesis? Could you give any examples?
Well, there are a lot of examples of critical problems in Genesis, and in my course, I deal with them. I mean, the most famous one, of course, is that in Genesis 1 and 2, you have 2 different creation stories that are at odds with each other. It isn't just that it's that they're different. It's like they're contradictory, and you get this throughout Genesis. You get a number of things in Genesis where one section will say one thing, one will say another, and it's almost certainly because, as scholars have known since the 19th century, it's because whoever produced the final product of Genesis is stitching together a variety of sources. And these sources sometimes will talk about similar things, but say different things about them. And so you end up with contradictory things. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, though, I mean, when you're talking about the historical Jesus, you're talking about records that were produced 30, 40, 50 years later. And that's not great. But it's not bad for the ancient world. The book of Genesis, we're talking about centuries later. We don't have the sources. I mean, I'm not just talking about Adam here. I'm talking about like Abraham, who's like a major figure. The sources for Abraham that we have are many centuries, 8 centuries, 7 centuries later. And so it's a question of what can you trust as being anything that's reliable at all. And that's one of the issues, obviously, I deal with in the course.
Okay, great. On a related note then, can I ask you, so like you say, it's a very old book. It's from a period where records, I guess, were a lot more sparsely kept than they are today. Do we have any idea when it might have been written, who the intended audience might have been?
Well, we have some idea about when it was written, or I should say scholars have a number of ideas because scholars don't agree. The traditional view of it is, of course, that Moses wrote Genesis and the next 4 books, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch or the Torah. And Moses, if Moses lived, he would have lived in about the 13th century. And so scholars, though, for a long time have recognized that this was not written by a single person, as I just indicated, and almost certainly was not written by somebody named Moses. The typical way of understanding it among scholars is that there are at least four sources behind the entire Pentateuch, and three of those sources are in the book of Genesis. And the sources would date anywhere from, say, the 10th century to the 6th century BCE. And so, long after the events they're narrating. And so the big question is, what's historical in them, given the fact you've got these hundreds of years distance.
We challenge here on YouTube a lot of the time. We discuss and we challenge a lot of preachers who take the book of Genesis literally.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that? And do you think it was intended to be a historical document, or do you think it was more allegorical or a mix of the two?
It's really hard to say what was in the author's minds when they were writing these things. My sense is that virtually everybody until the modern period who read it simply thought this was the way it happened. And so I assume that probably the author meant something like that. It certainly can't be taken literally. I mean, if you take chapter 2, if you take the creation story in Genesis chapter 2, the first thing created is the human being. The human being is created before there are any plants on earth or animals. And so, and the plants, in Genesis 1, the plants are created before there's a sun. How does that work exactly? And so you just can't take this literally. And also, as I said, there are contradictions in it and various things. So it is clearly, I think, legendary material and mythical material. But it's the big question I think critical scholars have is there anything historical in here at all? And what would it be? And so it's very, very interesting and important question. But the answer is no. I don't think you can really take it literally.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Could you touch on any of those potential historical parts for us?
Yeah. Well, so the way Genesis works is the first 11 chapters are a part that scholars have long called the primeval history, and it's like history before there's history, because it's the creation of Adam and Eve, and it's the flood under Noah, and these things that are like way back there before you have any history writers. And then starting in chapter 12, you have figures that are ostensibly historical figures. Abraham, who is called out of the nations of the earth to be the father of a great nation, to whom God will give the land of Israel. And so with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, you get these stories. There are very good reasons for thinking these stories are not historically accurate, especially in their details. For one thing, there are a lot of anachronisms in these stories. In other words, you have like people, you have groups of people like the Philistines, who are mentioned before there were any Philistines, and you have cities that are mentioned that the archaeologists have dug, and in fact they didn't exist yet at that time. And you have people riding domesticated camels century before camels were domesticated in that part of the world. And so there's all sorts of those are called anachronisms, right? You've got like something that's put in the wrong time period, and so that's not historical. And a lot of the stories are not, they're great stories. I mean, they're fantastic stories. I mean, so I don't want to undercut the book of Genesis at all. I think it's a fantastic book, but you have to take it as legend and myth rather than as history, or you're simply going to misunderstand it because it's not describing what really happened.
Yeah, I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. Here's a biggie for you. Are there any ways in which, aside from just the blanket taking it literally, are there any ways in which you think Christians have misunderstood and misinterpreted Genesis over the years?
Yeah, over the years, absolutely. I mean, of course, in traditional Christianity, the Old Testament, which would be the Hebrew Bible for Jews, but the Old Testament is used to predict what was going to happen with Jesus. And so even in the book of Genesis, traditionally Christians have found foreshadowings of Christ. And I don't think, the authors were not meaning that at all. But it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, they eat the fruit they're not supposed to eat, and they realize they're naked, and so they use fig leaves to cover up their genitals. But then God realizes and so God stitches together some leather, pants for them and some
Mhm.
britches or whatever you call them. And so, but the thing is, in the Christian interpretation, that would mean God had to kill animals in order to cover over their sin, and that was taken to be a foreshadowing of Christ, that is foreshadowing the death of Christ to cover over sin. And so this is a Christian interpretation of a passage that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And there are other things too, like the flood and things that just, Christians have interpreted as literal things that are. But apart from the literal things, there are all sorts of things in Genesis that are not predicting the Christian message. They're talking about something else.
Like we said, you're talking in this new online course about history, legend, and myth in Genesis. Can I ask you, as a biblical scholar, what is it that interests you about Genesis specifically? And why do you think that we average laymen should be interested too?
I think that all of us can learn a lot from the literature of the ancient world. Um, Not in order to know what really happened, but all great literature is great for a reason. I'm a big fan of Victorian novels, for example, and I read modern novels that are really high quality because they make me think about my life and my situation and what it means to be here, and it gives me other perspectives. And Genesis certainly provides that in spades. It tries to understand why humans are here and what our purpose in life is, and it has all sorts of smaller meanings, meaning stories about somebody who's going through horrible suffering, and then in the end it turns out well. If they stick with it, eventually, there's a silver lining in their suffering. And that things have a meaning that seem meaningless. Strikes me as a helpful thing to think about. You're in a meaningless situation and you realize actually there might be something here. And so when you read accounts like this, especially in this older literature, the reason this thing has survived for these thousands of years is because people found meaning in it. And I think it'd be a mistake to say, well, that didn't happen, so I ain't going to read it. Well, I mean, David Copperfield didn't happen either, but it's still a great book.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's a great way of looking at it. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about your course while we got a little bit of time?
Yeah, well, it's so the course is it's called In the Beginning, Myth, Legend, and History in the Book of Genesis. It's 6 lectures of about 30 minutes each, and the lectures are on different aspects of Genesis, from everything from trying to compare the creation stories to talking about issues involving the flood and various things and the patriarchs, and but also like who wrote this and how do we know? And what kind of inconsistencies are there? What kind of contradictions and scientific things? And so there's an early bird special now for people who want to buy it. And so if people want to get it now, they get a little discount. And it's a terrific value given how much these things normally cost from companies to sell this kind of thing. And so I think it's a very interesting course. It's on important stuff, and it's 6 lectures with other things provided with the course.
That's fantastic. I'm really excited because but Genesis for some reason does come up a lot, and I'm really interested to hear your take on it.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining me. This has been really wonderful. It's been so great to speak to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I hope your listeners enjoy this, and they can. I do a lot of this kind of thing on my blog, by the way. I've got a thing just called the Bart Ehrman blog. If they want to look, they can do all sorts of stuff that I do, this kind of stuff, especially with the New Testament, but also the Old Testament. And but I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your questions. They've been right on target. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I can't recommend enough your books as well to everybody who's listening, because they really are fantastic.
Thank you.
There you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really, really did. I can't tell you how pleased I am and how excited I am about Bart's new course. In the Beginning is available right now at early bird pricing. It's $34.95. The course formally launches on the 25th, and you can only get that deal now and through the first week after the launch, so I highly recommend you grab it fast. Even when it goes live, it will only be $39.95, which is just such good value for a course from Dr. Ehrman. I really can't recommend enough. You get 6 30-minute lectures, which will be available to you as soon as you purchase. There will be PDF lesson guides, FAQ, and lifetime access to the course. If you are interested, please check it out using the link down below. You will not only be getting access to a fascinating course and enhancing your knowledge of ancient literature and the Bible, which, let's be honest, is going to be really useful for those debates on the internet, but you will also be supporting my channel, which I greatly appreciate. It's been so wonderful to be able to work with an amazing scholar whose books I have read and who I admire so much. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your support that has allowed me to do things like this. It's so cool. Before we go, I would like to give a huge shout out and a big thank you to my giant chickens over on Patreon: Aaron Speer, Amalgam of Neuroses, Amber, Baked Bads, Bert Whitehead, Chantale, Chris Simpson, Connie Wright, Connla, Chicken Maximus, Lyons, goddammit Connla, Corey Garner, Curious Quacker, Danny, Denny5252, Dr. Mint, Elle, Faye Gregory, Fulcrum, Gaming Ridge, Gay of Reckoning, George Bush, Henry Curtis, Izzy, Jan Bojarp, Jason Metcalf, Joe Rowe, John Fry, John Smith, Kent Woodward, Chris Convaga, Lizzie Gale, Lynn Dobbs, Mattus McChicken Nuggetus, Miles Tegg, Mogaringa, Mr. Creosote, Nerd Fiction, Ninja Red, Peter Kiroak, Psyched Dude, Kike, Racing Pig, Rosina Keller, Sarah Shavy, Simping on Emma Thorne, Seriously, Tank Low, Taxman, The Enchanter formerly known as Tim, The Myth Vision Podcast, Tracy O'Rourke, Valerie, and Wasatch Witch. Thank you so much, you guys are absolutely amazing. All of your support is so appreciated. If you did enjoy this video, do consider liking it, leave your thoughts down below, maybe give it a share, check out my other stuff. Do have a look at Dr. Ehrman's course if you are interested. I think it's going to be so cool. I hope you have a very lovely week, and I will see you really soon.